3 days after the first soldier set foot on Normandy, the beaches no longer belonged to Germany. Where men had been cut down in the surf just 72 hours earlier, there were now supply depots, roads, field hospitals, a war machine assembling itself on the edge of occupied Europe. By then, more than 300,000 Allied troops had come ashore. Tanks rolled inland and ships unloaded around the clock. The Allies had broken through Hitler's Atlantic Wall and held their ground. For the Allies, it was the beginning of the end. After 4 years of fighting, they finally had a foothold in Western Europe. A second front was open. The road to Berlin had begun. For Germany, it was a catastrophe. Hitler had always known an invasion was coming. He had spent years fortifying the coast, certain in the knowledge he could throw the Allies back into the sea. He failed. Now Germany was caught between two enormous forces, the Western Allies closing in from France and the Soviet Union grinding toward them from the east. A war on two fronts, the exact nightmare German generals had feared for decades. And for the world, Normandy became a symbol. Proof that the tide had turned, that the largest, most coordinated military operation in human history could succeed, that occupied Europe could be liberated. Storming a defended beach was one of the hardest things an army could do at the time. Most attempts had ended in disaster. So how did the Allies actually pull it off? The answer doesn't begin in 1944. It began more than 20 years earlier. In 1939, Germany went to war. Poland fell in weeks. Then, in the spring of 1940, Hitler turned west. Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, all overrun. France, considered to have one of the finest armies in the world, collapsed in just 6 weeks. By summer, Nazi Germany controlled almost all of Western Europe. Britain stood alone. Then Hitler made his greatest gamble. In June 1941, he invaded the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers poured east in the largest land invasion ever launched. The Eastern Front became a slaughterhouse, and from that moment, the bulk of the German army was fighting Stalin, not the West. 6 months later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and the United States entered the war. For the first time, the full industrial might of America stood against Hitler. The Allies agreed on a strategy: defeat Germany first. But that raised an impossible question. How do you get an army back into a continent Hitler had spent years turning into a fortress? Stalin demanded a second front in the West, and he demanded it now. His country was bleeding millions. But the Western Allies hesitated, and for good reason. They had seen what happened when an amphibious assault went wrong. At Gallipoli in the First World War, landings against a defended shore ended in disaster. And in 1942, a raid on the French port of Dieppe was a massacre. Of the soldiers who landed, more than half were killed, wounded, or captured in a single day. The message was clear. Attacking a defended beach was one of the deadliest missions for the military. And yet, the Allies were about to attempt it, on a scale the world had never seen. So how did the Allies succeed where others had failed? The answer wasn't luck. It was a rulebook written decades before a single soldier landed at Normandy. After the slaughter at Gallipoli, most of the world's armies gave up on the idea of storming a defended beach. They filed it away as too hard, too costly, impossible. All except one. In the 1920s, the United States Marine Corps began preparing for a different war, a future conflict with Japan across the vast distances of the Pacific. To win it, they would have to take heavily defended islands by force, landing from the sea against an enemy waiting on the shore. The very thing everyone else had abandoned. So the Marines did what no one else would. They studied the problem. They ran exercises, made mistakes, and slowly built a system. By the 1930s, it had become formal doctrine, a written framework for how to land an army on a hostile shore and win. That doctrine identified 6 essential components, 6 elements that every successful amphibious assault would need: command and control, ship-to-shore movement, naval fire support, air support, the establishment of a beachhead, and communications and logistics. Get all 6 right, and a landing could succeed. Get even one wrong, and thousands could die on the sand. By 1944, the Allies had tested this framework again and again, in North Africa, in Sicily, on the many islands of the Pacific. Normandy would be the ultimate test, the largest application of that doctrine ever attempted. So let's break it down. The 6 elements that turned an impossible task into the turning point of the war. In an operation this size, someone has to be in charge, and everyone has to know who. The Allies built a clear chain of command. At sea, the Navy led. But the moment the landing craft crossed the line of departure and headed for the beach, authority shifted to the Army commanders ashore. Minimal confusion or hesitation. In theory, every officer knew exactly when the decisions became theirs. An invasion lives or dies on how fast you can build strength on the beach. The Allies assembled a vast fleet of specialized craft, small boats to carry men, larger ones to carry tanks, and great landing ships that drove supplies straight onto the sand without a single port. Wave after wave, the combat power on shore grew faster than the Germans could push it back. This is where Normandy almost fell apart. At Omaha Beach, the first waves were pinned down, slaughtered in the open, and unable to move. The pre-invasion bombing had missed. The men were trapped. And then the Navy did something unorthodox. Destroyers steamed in so close to shore that their hulls nearly scraped the seabed, just inches of water beneath them, and opened fire directly on the German positions, point blank. It was that fire that finally cracked the defenses and let the men off the beach. Above it all, the Allies owned the sky. Thousands of aircraft patrolled the Channel and the skies over France. The German Luftwaffe was nowhere to be found. Allied planes struck enemy reinforcements moving toward the coast, so the troops on the beach could fight without being bombed from above. However, it is important to note that bombings prior to the landings did fail to destroy a meaningful portion of German fortifications on the beaches. Taking the beach was only the beginning. Holding it was everything. Army and Navy task forces worked side by side to organize the chaos, receiving men, moving supplies, treating the wounded, turning a contested shoreline into a somewhat secure base for the millions who would follow. And binding all of it together, information and supply. 9,000 radio transmitters, fuel piped across the bottom of the channel, entire artificial harbors towed across the sea and sunk into place. An invasion isn't won by the first man on the beach. It's won by the endless river of men, fuel, and steel that comes after him. Normandy was an unmitigated disaster for Hitler. He had no way of ever expelling the Allied war machine from continental Europe. Berlin wouldn't fall tomorrow, but the Allies were headed in only one direction. To add insult to injury, the Red Army would launch a major offensive in the east within 2 weeks and destroy 28 German divisions by summer's end. From this point, there was no recovery. Germany would fight on for another 11 months and bring abject misery upon millions more yet, but it was all on borrowed time.